They tried to drug me at 2 a.m. in my own house. I was wide awake, thank God. I hadn't been sleeping well for weeks, and that night I was sitting up in bed, reading an old gardening catalog, when I heard the soft creak of the back door. That door was never quiet. George used to say he'd fix it one day, but he never did, and now I was glad. I turned off the bedside lamp and sat in the dark, my ears sharp. Someone was moving in the kitchen. Light steps. Purposeful. Not like a burglar. No. They weren't trying to be silent. They thought I was asleep. I picked up my phone and tapped the security app. Thank God for that little camera my granddaughter Lily installed last Christmas. A gift she insisted on setting up herself. Just so I can check in on you, Nana. The screen lit up. The hallway camera showed 2 figures. My grandson Caleb and a woman in scrubs. A nurse. My heart didn't beat faster. Not yet. I watched as they moved toward my room. The woman was holding something small. A syringe. I knew then they were going to drug me. Probably just enough to make me loopy. Enough to get my signature on something. Caleb whispered, "She's usually out by now. Just a small dose, okay? We just need her to sign it tonight. I've got the documents ready." I froze. Not in fear. In fury. They weren't even hiding it anymore. I lay back on the bed, eyes closed, heart slow, pretending. I felt the door open, just slightly. Heard the woman step inside. Smelled the faint odor of antiseptic. She leaned over me, and I let my breath slow to mimic sleep. Her fingers touched my wrist. "She's very still," she whispered. "Just do it," Caleb hissed. I felt the pinch, a needle, quick. I didn't flinch. The moment she stepped back, I exhaled, just slightly, and let my eyes flutter as if disturbed. "Hmm? Caleb?" He cursed softly. "It's okay, Nana. You were having trouble sleeping. This will help." "Why, what's this?" I mumbled, eyes half-lidded. "Just rest," the nurse said. Her voice was too smooth. Then they were gone, whispering down the hall. The front door clicked again. I sat up slowly. My arm tingled. Whatever they gave me, it wasn't enough. I hadn't swallowed anything, and the dose must have been minimal. Still, I felt the heaviness settle behind my eyes like storm clouds. I walked to the hallway, knees shaking slightly. The house was empty, cold. I went straight to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the USB stick I kept for Lily's school projects, slid it into the back of the modem, downloaded the security footage, and transferred the file. Labeled it 2 a.m. attempt. I poured myself a glass of water with trembling hands and sat at the table. The same kitchen where I used to make Caleb blueberry pancakes every Saturday morning. The same Caleb who'd just tried to knock me out. My only grandson. George would have been furious. I sat for hours staring at the screensaver on my laptop. The video showed everything. Caleb unlocking the door, letting in the nurse, her prepping the syringe, the conversation. I rewound the moment he said it. "We just need her to sign it tonight." Sign what? I went to the living room, to the secretary desk I hadn't opened in years. The file folders were where I'd left them, all in George's handwriting. Insurance, will, property deed, all untouched. But there, on the coffee table, a folder I hadn't seen before. Light blue. Inside, a copy of my signature. Badly forged. On a financial power of attorney I'd never agreed to. My knees buckled. I sat hard in the old chair. Someone had already tried this before. Maybe when I'd been sick in the hospital back in March. That was when they'd first started helping with my mail. When John, my son, said, "Don't worry about the bills, Mom. We've got it covered." I didn't say a word the next morning. I didn't tell Lily. I didn't call the police. I just made myself tea, watched the sun rise, but something had cracked. And I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just a mistake. This was planned. They wanted my signature. They wanted everything. And they thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd just go along quietly. They were wrong. I didn't sleep at all that night. The drug wore off by dawn, but the nausea stayed. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, both hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea. I didn't drink it. I just needed something to hold on to. When the sun finally rose, the street outside was quiet. Just Mrs. Tiller's sprinklers starting their morning hiss. I watched the water catch the light, thinking of nothing and everything. It had been a long time since I'd truly felt alone. George was gone 8 years now, but this was different. Back then, I'd still believed in family, still believed that grief could bring people closer. It hadn't. Not really. John, my only son, stepped in quickly, helped with the accounts, the lawyer, the bank. "Just until you get back on your feet, Mom," he said. I got back on my feet. He never let go. It started small, taking over the bills, helping with online banking, bringing me papers to sign, saying, "It's just easier if I handle it." I didn't argue. My head was still full of grief, my legs still unsure. He was my son. Later, when I asked questions, I got answers too polished to trust. "Oh, it's just a routine transfer. I put some funds into a better account for you. No, we don't need to worry about those old life insurance forms. I already sorted them." He'd say it all with a smile, a gentle hand on my shoulder, a pat on the arm. But each time, something was taken from me. A detail, a number, a document. And then there was Caleb. He used to visit just to eat my peach cobbler and complain about his professors. He was always a sweet boy. Not the brightest, but kind. Or I thought so. But after George died, Caleb started showing up with questions that didn't sound like his own. "Do you still have your original will? What happens if you can't, think clearly anymore?" I chalked it up to curiosity. Maybe he was just worried. That's what I told myself. Until March. I'd had a small stroke. Just a blip, the doctor said. My speech was fine, memory intact, but I was dizzy for days. John rushed in, stayed at the house, took over everything while I recovered. That's when it must have started. Because when I came home from the hospital, I couldn't find my birth certificate, my property deed. The lockbox key was missing. John said, "You probably misplaced them. I'll help you look." But I never saw those papers again. And now, last night, a nurse and a syringe and a whispered plan to get her signature. They weren't waiting anymore. Whatever they'd started in March, they wanted to finish now. I opened the blue folder again. That false signature. A printed date, April 12th. I was still in recovery then. The form gave full financial power of attorney to John R. Jensen, effective immediately, no cosigner, no medical validation, no witness. But there was one problem. My signature. It wasn't mine. They needed a real one. They'd tried to trick me, then forge me, then drug me, all to get my hand on a page. I sat for a long time, looking at the signature. The loops were wrong. The J curved backward, something I'd never done. They'd tried to copy it from an old check, probably, but they didn't know what mattered. Not the shape of the letters, but the pressure, the movement, the moment. They didn't know me at all. At 10 a.m., the phone rang. Caller ID, John. I didn't pick up. I let it ring and watched the screen fade to black. A minute later, A text arrived. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're feeling better this morning. Caleb said you were a little confused last night. Want me to bring over some groceries later? Confused. That word. It landed like a slap. They were setting the stage. Next would come the whispering to neighbors. Then a doctor's visit I didn't ask for. Then maybe a nice, assisted living facility they'd researched on my behalf. I put the phone face down. Enough. By noon, I was dressed and standing at the front window, watching the wind shift the trees. I didn't have a grand plan yet, but I had one thing. Time. Time and my mind. Both still mine. I took the USB stick and slipped it into the pocket of my coat. Then I picked up the phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Wesley Atwood's office, the secretary answered. How may I direct your call? Tell him Louise Jensen's calling, I said calmly. His wife's high school history teacher. He'll remember. A pause, then a warm voice. Mrs. Jensen, it's been, 15 years? Are you all right? I need a private legal consultation, I said. Immediately. And Wesley, make sure there are no records released to anyone. Not even my son, especially not my son. He was silent for a moment. Then, come in at 2 p.m., my office. I'll close the door. I hung up, exhaled, and looked around my quiet house. I'd raised a child in these rooms, baked birthday cakes, held George's hand during storms. Now, the battle for my life and my dignity would start here. And I wasn't going down easy. By 1:30, I was in the car. It took me a minute to remember how the seatbelt clipped. I hadn't driven since last Thanksgiving. John said it was too risky for me, insisted I let Caleb chauffeur me around. But I'd kept the Camry in good shape, had the oil changed every 6 months just out of stubbornness. I turned the key. It started on the first try. Wesley's office was across town, in one of those glass and stone buildings with names like Heritage Park Professional Center. It looked like the kind of place where young men wore fitted suits and spoke in curated tones. Wesley had been a decent kid in school, a bit too proud, but clever. His wife, Janine, had once cried in my classroom because her best friend spread a rumor about her at prom. I still remembered comforting her in the hallway. He came out to meet me himself. Mrs. Jensen, he said, extending a hand. You look remarkably well. I was drugged last night, I replied. I'm not in the mood for small talk. He blinked, then nodded. Understood. Let's go inside. His office smelled like leather and carpet cleaner. There were certificates on the wall, a framed photo of his kids in Halloween costumes, a wooden desk too large for its purpose. He shut the door behind us, then gestured to the chair opposite his. You said something about a legal matter involving your son? I said I was drugged, I corrected. In my own home, at 2 a.m. I have video proof. Do you want to see it? He paused. Yes. I pulled the USB from my purse and handed it to him. While he inserted it into his laptop, I stared at the bookshelf behind him. Mostly law books, a few biographies. One of the spines was crooked. The video played. He watched without interrupting. Caleb's voice. The nurse's hands. My limp body under the blanket. The whispered words. Just a small dose. Get her to sign. Wesley leaned back in his chair. That, he said, is serious. I folded my hands in my lap. They want control of my finances, my house, my life. My son's been moving toward this for months, maybe years. I allowed it because I didn't want to believe he could be capable of this. But now I have no illusions. He looked at me carefully. Do you believe you're in immediate danger? I shook my head. Not physical danger, but I know the type of danger that wears a friendly face. I've seen it in the classroom. I've seen it in hospital waiting rooms. It's the kind that smiles while it erases you. He nodded slowly. Okay. First, we revoke any power of attorney you may have signed, valid or otherwise. Then we secure your financial accounts. Then we make copies of that video. Several. One goes in a legal lockbox under my name, one with a trusted party, one in my vault. I leaned forward. They've already forged one signature. They're trying to create a paper trail that makes me look incompetent. If I disappear tomorrow, they'll say I was delusional, that I forgot things, that I was confused, and everyone will believe them. Then we make sure there's a record, he said, starting today. He typed as we spoke. Quick, precise movements. Do you have access to your accounts? I used to. My online login doesn't work anymore. John said the bank must have updated their system. I'll file an inquiry. We'll flag any irregular transactions. And I'll request an injunction against all financial activity from your son. Effective immediately. I looked down at my hands. They were spotted and dry, skin thinning with age. But they were steady. Wesley, I said quietly, if anything happens to me, if I fall or collapse, or if someone finds me unresponsive, don't trust it. His fingers stopped on the keyboard. You think they might try again? I think I stopped being a mother to them a long time ago, I said. Now I'm just an obstacle. There was a silence. He clicked something, then turned the screen toward me. This is your revocation of power of attorney. I'll file it today. John Jensen will be notified formally. He'll lose all access unless you give explicit consent, in writing, with 2 witnesses. Good, I said. He opened a folder. And I'll prepare a document declaring you fully competent to manage your affairs. Signed by me, dated and sealed. I signed everything. My hand didn't shake once. Afterwards, he leaned back and exhaled. May I ask something? Personal? Yes. Why now? Why not months ago? You're sharp. You must have seen it coming. I smiled faintly. Because hope dies slow, Wesley. You raise someone, hold their hand when they're little, give them everything. You don't wake up one day ready to believe they'd steal from you. Not until they put a needle in your arm. He didn't say anything to that. As I stood to leave, I looked out his office window. A family walked across the parking lot. A woman in a suit, a man holding a child's hand. They were laughing. I'm not angry, I said. I'm not even hurt. Not the way you'd think. I'm just tired of being taken for granted. He nodded. I'll keep this file under lock and key. If anyone asks, we've never spoken. Thank you. By the time I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt taller, not younger, not safer, but whole. I still had work to do. I wasn't finished yet. I stopped by the bank on my way home. Same branch I'd used since 1976. Back then it was called First Mutual, and the manager knew every client's name by heart. These days, it had a sleeker name, Horizon Financial, and a lot more marble floors. But I recognized one face behind the glass. Mrs. Jensen? The teller squinted, then smiled. Oh my goodness, I haven't seen you in a while. It's Carol. I used to help you with your safety deposit box. I nodded. Yes, I'm here to speak with a manager. Today. Of course. She lowered her voice, sensing the urgency. Give me a moment. I didn't sit. I stood near the window watching cars move through the lot. The people passing by were younger than me, faster. But none of them had lived as much life as I had. I reminded myself of that. The door opened. A young man in a navy blazer stepped out. Mrs. Jensen? I'm Michael Hartley, Account Services Manager. Come with me, please. His office was small, efficient, impersonal. He offered me water. I declined. I need a full printout of every transaction made from my accounts in the last 6 months, I said, placing my ID on the desk. I also need to know who has access, and I want that access revoked today. He blinked. Of course, let me just verify your credentials. I passed the secondary form of ID. He tapped on his keyboard, then frowned. It shows here that the online access was transferred to a joint profile, under a John Jensen. Is that your... My son, I interrupted. That transfer was made without my consent. Please mark it as disputed. He hesitated. Mrs. Jensen, we usually require written proof. I just came from my attorney's office. He's submitting documentation as we speak. You'll receive formal notice today. In the meantime, I expect these accounts to be frozen. I'm protecting myself from financial abuse. That word hit hard. Abuse. But it was the truth. He nodded slowly. I understand. Let me get your statements. He printed out stack after stack of paper. I sat there, flipping through them as the weight of each transaction settled like dust in my lungs. $8,000 wire to something called Pivotal Ventures. One $300 furniture store purchase. Caleb didn't even live here. $600 recurring payments to a private gym. $4,700 labeled home maintenance. I hadn't seen a single repair. And then the worst of it, transfers between my savings account and an account ending in 1198. That was mine. But these were withdrawals I never approved, all labeled routine transfers. Routine for who? Do you recognize any of these, Mrs. Jensen? I recognize theft, I said quietly. That's enough for today. Freeze it all. Yes, ma'am. He handed me the confirmation slip. I folded it neatly and tucked it into my purse. On my way out, Carol caught my eye again. Her smile faded when she saw my expression. Something told me word would get around. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, sorting papers into 3 piles: legal, financial, and personal. I wrote dates on each folder, added notes, clipped receipts. Years ago, George used to tease me about my labeling habit, said it made the kitchen feel like a post office. But now, it was the only thing keeping me from drowning in chaos. At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I stood still, spine straight. No one called to say they were coming. I hadn't told anyone I'd be home. I opened the door. It was John. He had that face on, the one he used when trying to appear calm but was boiling underneath. The same expression he'd worn in high school when the principal called him in for cheating on his physics final. Hey, Mom, he said too brightly. Can we talk? I didn't step aside. You can talk from there. He glanced at the porch, uncomfortable. Caleb mentioned you were upset about something. There seems to be a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? He sighed. Look, I know you're still recovering from the stroke and sometimes memory... Don't, I cut in. Don't you dare. His mouth snapped shut. I watched him shift his weight. Guilty feet. I know everything, John, about the documents, the forged signature, the money, and I know about the nurse last night. He went pale. What nurse? You drugged me. That's ridiculous, he said quickly. You were confused. I have it on camera. He froze. For the first time in a long time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not worry, not exasperation. Fear. I stepped forward, just enough to make him back away from the door. Your access to my accounts has been revoked. Legal action is pending. I've hired a lawyer. Everything you've done has been documented. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. You wanted my signature? I said coldly. You'll get one. On a restraining order, if necessary. Mom? I am no longer your mom when it comes to finances, or trust, or forgiveness. He looked like he'd been slapped. I raised you, I said, voice low. I gave you everything. You took my grief, my silence, and you turned it into opportunity. I didn't mean, but you did. I stepped back inside and closed the door slowly. He didn't knock again. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned on the porch light, sat back down at my table, and continued sorting the papers. One page at a time, order was coming back. Piece by quiet piece. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. My hands ached from sorting papers the night before, and the air had that early fall sharpness that seeps into the joints. I sat up slowly, letting the stiffness pass. Then I looked out the window. No sign of John's car. I hadn't expected him to show again so soon, not after the way I'd spoken to him. But I didn't trust him to stay away. The video file was still tucked safely into my sewing box, along with George's war medals and Lily's old Mother's Day cards. I didn't keep anything important in obvious places anymore. Not since the hospital stay. Not since things started going missing. A bond certificate here, a notepad there. I made myself tea and watched the steam rise from the cup. Then I reached for the old landline phone on the counter. Not the cell. The landline. The number no one but Lily still used. I dialed her. "Hi, Nana." Her voice was sleepy but cheerful. "I'm not calling to chat, sweetheart," I said gently. "I need to ask a favor, a big one. Anything. I need you to meet me at the library this afternoon. No questions right now. Bring your laptop, and if anyone asks, you're just helping me check email." There was a pause, but Lily wasn't the kind to pry. "Okay. 3 o'clock? Sharp." I hung up and stood for a moment, watching the phone in my hand. I hated dragging her into this, but she was the only one I trusted. The only one who never asked me to sign anything, never treated me like I was fragile or confused. She just loved me. Purely. Quietly. At 3 o'clock sharp, we met at the library. I chose the corner computer desk, the one near the stacks of old town records. Fewer people passed through there, and it gave us some privacy. Lily arrived in a windbreaker, carrying a battered messenger bag and a look of quiet concern. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I will be." I handed her the USB drive. "Can you upload this video somewhere safe? Somewhere password protected? Off-site? And then send a copy to this email address." I handed her a note with Wesley's encrypted legal inbox. She didn't ask what was on the video, just nodded and got to work. That's the thing about women like us. We don't need all the details to know when something matters. As she typed, I pulled out a small notebook and wrote the names of the companies listed on my account statements, the ones John had been siphoning money to. "I want to know what these are," I said. "If they're real, if they're registered under Caleb's name, if they even exist. You want me to research them? Quietly, discreetly. Don't use your personal email. Don't let your parents know." She didn't flinch. "Nana," she said, closing the laptop. "Whatever this is, I'm in. And I think I've known something wasn't right for a long time." I looked at her then. Properly looked. She had her mother's chin, but my eyes, sharp and steady. Maybe I hadn't lost everything after all. We spent another hour digging through websites. Most of the companies were shell names, addresses that didn't exist, businesses with no phone number. A few were linked to Caleb's old college roommate. One was registered out of state. They were trying to clean the money. Slowly, quietly, bit by bit. We saved every screenshot. By the time I left the library, the sky had clouded over. The wind had picked up. I felt stronger. but the kind of strong that comes after bracing against a storm. That evening, around 7 p.m., Caleb knocked on the door. I didn't answer at first, just watched him through the peephole. He had a small bouquet in his hand. Grocery store flowers, the kind with too much cellophane and not enough heart. I opened the door a crack. "Hi, Nana," he said, smile too wide. "Can we talk?" "About what?" He looked surprised. "About everything. I know things have gotten a little weird and I wanted to clear the air." I didn't move. "I brought flowers," he added, lifting the bouquet as if it proved sincerity. "I'm allergic," I lied, then stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. He looked startled. "Don't take this the wrong way," I said, voice even. "But I've spoken to my lawyer. I've seen the documents. I know what you tried to do." His face changed then, just for a flicker. Not shame. Annoyance. Like a child caught sneaking candy. "Nana, come on," he said, with a practiced chuckle. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe things got misinterpreted." "Do you know what a felony is, Caleb?" I asked quietly. "Do you know how many years it carries for financial fraud and medical impersonation?" He blinked. "Wait, what?" "I have the footage. Of you and the nurse. I have witnesses, backups, a legal file. This isn't going to disappear." He looked around, suddenly nervous. "Can we not do this outside?" "We're not doing anything. I'm making a choice. From now on, you're not welcome on my property. If you come back uninvited, I'll file a police report. If you contact me again, I'll forward everything to the authorities." His jaw tightened. "You don't mean that," he said. "You love me." I looked him dead in the eye. I did. But love doesn't survive betrayal, Caleb. It just turns quiet. Then I stepped back inside and locked the door. Sunday dinner had always been a Jensen tradition. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, too much wine, too many opinions. George used to say it was the only time the family remembered how to speak without shouting. So when John called, from a new number, like I wouldn't recognize his voice, and said, "We'd love to have you for dinner tonight, Mom," I didn't answer right away. He waited, then added, "Just the family. Nothing formal. Caleb wants to apologize. We all do." I let a silence stretch just long enough to sting. "I'll be there at 6, I said. "Don't wait for me." I wore a soft gray sweater and my old brooch, the one George bought in Asheville for our 30th. A quiet reminder of who I was before I became just Mom or the problem. I didn't wear anything too nice. They'd expect that. I wanted to look just tired enough to be underestimated. Their house hadn't changed. Vinyl siding, perfect lawn, overfed hydrangeas. John opened the door like a man who'd rehearsed humility in the mirror. "Hi, Mom," he said. "John." Inside, the air smelled like garlic and guilt. Caleb was in the kitchen, setting the table too carefully. Sarah, John's wife, was arranging sliced bread in a basket like she was auditioning for sincerity. "Mrs. Jensen," she said. She always called me that when she was trying to be polite. The rest of the time she said, "Your mother," like it tasted bad. "Sarah," I nodded. Dinner was roasted pork, not chicken. They never got the details right anymore. Conversation tiptoed around real topics. Caleb asked if I was feeling better. John said he was glad we could all move past the misunderstanding. I let them talk. Let them feel in control. I ate slowly. I watched. And I listened. To Sarah's mention of a possible investment opportunity. To Caleb saying he was thinking of moving out maybe getting his own place. To John's casual remark, "Oh, Mom, that thing we talked about, the deed paperwork, we'll need your signature again soon, just some corrections." There it was. I took a bite of green beans. Chewed. Swallowed. "Of course," I said mildly. "Just send it to my lawyer." The room shifted. John smiled tightly. "You don't have to bring Wesley into everything." "I do now," I said. "You made sure of that." Silence. Sarah picked up her wine glass. "We're just trying to get back to normal, Mrs. Jensen." "There's no normal left," I said, evenly. "Only truth. And consequences." They didn't know what to do with that, so they smiled and cleared the plates. I left before dessert. In the car, I sat in silence for a long time. I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't made a scene. But I'd seen what I needed to see. They were still trying. Still hoping I'd slip. That I'd soften. Forget. Agree to something just for convenience. They didn't realize. I'd already buried the version of me who'd fall for that. They were eating dinner with someone new now. Someone watching. Counting. And ready. Lily came over Monday evening with a tote bag full of leftover soup and 2 little pastries from the cafe near her office. "I thought maybe you hadn't been eating right," she said, setting everything down on the counter like she'd done it 100 times before. "I eat just fine," I said, "but I won't say no to soup." She smiled, but didn't push. That's what I've always liked about her. She's not one of those girls who fills silence with noise. She lets things breathe. We sat at the table, the soup warming on the stove. Outside, the wind had started to pick up. Dry leaves clicking across the driveway like little feet trying to run away from something. She looked at me for a long moment, then finally said, "Is it all really as bad as I think it is?" I didn't answer right away. I reached for the sugar tin and took out the flash drive. I laid it on the table between us. "This is the only copy I didn't lock away," I said quietly, "and I kept it for one reason, so I could decide whether you were ready to see it." She didn't touch it. She just looked at me. "I'm not afraid of whatever's on it." "I know you're not." "But I'm not talking about fear. I'm talking about how once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. It changes things." She nodded. "Things have already changed." I studied her face, the freckles, the strong chin, the worry she tried not to show. "Do you remember," I said softly, "when you were 9 and you asked me why your dad never came to my birthday parties?" She smiled faintly. "You said he had a busy job and was tired." That was only partly true. The truth is, he didn't want to come. He thought it was boring, that there were more important people to be around, more important faces to impress. "I always thought it was Mom," she said. "She never liked you much." "Oh, she didn't. But your father, he's not a victim of her. He's her match. Same priorities. Same blind spot for kindness." Lily was quiet. The soup started to bubble gently behind us. "Sweetheart," I said, "I need you to understand something. What's happening now? This isn't just about money. It's not just about papers or bank accounts or who signs what. It's about whether I exist as a person to them or just as a gate they need to get through." She nodded slowly. "And you don't think they'll stop?" "I know they won't." There was a long silence. Then Lily reached out and gently placed her hand over mine. "I want to help you, not just with tech stuff or errands. I want to do what they never did. Stand beside you, not over you." I looked down at her fingers. Strong, unpainted nails, no rings. A woman who didn't need to play roles to feel valuable. I believe you, I said simply. We had soup then. Thick, comforting, homemade. She'd always been good at making do with what she had. Another thing we shared. Before she left, she handed me a folder. I did what you asked. Those businesses, the ones from the statements, most are empty shells. One's registered in Nevada under Caleb's college roommate's name. Another is tied to a P.O. box in Florida. I opened the folder and scanned the pages. She'd printed everything. Screenshots, registrations, address histories. Clean, organized. You did all this in a day? I asked. She shrugged. You taught me to be efficient. I held the folder in my hands. It felt heavier than it was. You keep a copy? I asked. Of course. She hesitated at the door. Nana, are you going to take them to court? I didn't answer directly. I'm going to take back what they tried to steal, I said, and then I'm going to make sure they never try again. She nodded. No shock. No hesitation. And that's when I knew I wasn't alone in this anymore. Not really. After she left, I placed her folder next to the one Wesley had started. 2 neat stacks. 2 lines of defense. Let them come. This time, I had something they didn't count on. A witness. And a granddaughter who didn't flinch. Wesley had already pulled the files when I arrived. 2 binders lay open on his desk, one marked Initial POA Attempt, and the other Banking Activity, Disputed. He didn't offer coffee this time, just gestured for me to sit. I took the liberty of requesting certified copies of every document your son submitted under your name, he said, flipping a page toward me. This is the original power of attorney you signed in March, during your recovery. I scanned the signature. It was mine, yes. But the text was different from what I remembered. There was a clause buried halfway down the second page. May act independently without further consultation, including financial instruments, property transactions, and fiduciary reallocation. I didn't read that, I said. John told me it was just to help pay hospital bills. He didn't lie, Wesley said. He just didn't say everything. He turned the page. And this, he added, tapping a copy underneath, was filed 2 weeks later. Look closely. Another power of attorney. Different date. But the signature was mine. Except it wasn't. The L sloped wrong. The S leaned too far left. And most telling of all, the ink bled differently. A scanned signature, not a real one. He looked at me carefully. I can order forensic analysis, but it's already obvious. This is a forgery. I nodded. No surprise anymore, just confirmation. And the bank records? He pushed the second binder toward me. We flagged over $120,000 in questionable transfers. A portion went through a dummy company tied to Caleb's friend. The rest filtered through what appears to be a consulting firm owned by your son. On paper, it looks like you're paying him for services. What services? I asked, though I already knew. None. Not a single invoice. No agreement. Just lines on a spreadsheet with vague labels. I sat back, my hands resting on the table's edge. And that's enough to press charges? Wesley nodded slowly. More than enough, but here's where it gets delicate. If we go to court now, it's a full-scale family scandal. Media might pick it up. It's public record. You'll have to testify. I'm not afraid of court, I said. I know. But we can also send a cease and desist. Threaten formal charges unless they voluntarily return the funds and void all access. That might be cleaner, faster. And if they don't cooperate, then we proceed. I thought for a moment. Let's start with the letter. Give them a deadline. 10 business days? 3. He looked up. You're sure? I've been patient for 8 months. They get 3 days. Wesley smiled faintly and made a note. I'll write it today. Clear, specific, and firm. Make sure it mentions the footage, I added. Let them know we're not bluffing. Already included. He typed for several minutes while I reviewed the list of forged transactions again. Each one hurt in its own way. Not for the amount, but for what it meant. Trust, eroded line by line. Love, exploited in plain numbers. Before I left, I handed him Lily's folder. Supplemental research, I said. He flipped through it, eyebrows lifting. Impressive. She's thorough. She's her grandmother's girl. He laughed softly, then grew serious again. Louise, this isn't just a legal case. This is personal war. If you keep going, you don't get to go back to pretending everything's fine. I don't want to pretend, I said. I want to be free. He stood, extended his hand. Then let's get you free. As I left the office, the wind caught the edge of my scarf. I let it blow for a moment, feeling the air on my face. I wasn't tired. I wasn't afraid. I was just getting started. On Wednesday morning, I called John. The tone was different this time. Lighter, almost casual. I knew how to soften my voice just enough. I'd been a teacher for 34 years. I knew how to make people believe what I needed them to. Hi, sweetheart, I said. I've been thinking, maybe I was too harsh the other night. A pause. Then, Mom? I'd like to talk. Just us. You, Caleb, me. No lawyers. Another pause. He was weighing it. Of course, he said. That sounds good. Maybe we can clear the air. I think that would be nice. Come by tomorrow around 6. I'll make coffee. He agreed too fast. They thought I was coming back to the fold, that I'd blinked, that the threat had passed. And so they said yes, to coffee, to peace, to one more chance to wrap their hands around what was left of me. But I wasn't offering peace. I was offering a mirror. The next day, I prepared like I used to for parent-teacher conferences. Clean table, 2 chairs across from mine, a notepad. The coffee brewed, not too strong. The front door unlocked. At exactly 5:56, they pulled into the driveway. Caleb looked nervous. John looked polished. He always dressed the part when he thought negotiation was coming. Hi, Mom, he said, stepping inside like he owned the air. Thanks for inviting us. Caleb mumbled hello. He didn't meet my eyes. We sat. I poured coffee. Then I placed the envelope in the center of the table. Plain, manila, sealed. John looked at it. What's that? Everything, I said. Every document, every screenshot, every bank record, and a printed transcript of what the security camera caught on Saturday night. His smile twitched. Mom, I'm not asking questions, I said evenly. I'm giving answers. You have 3 days to return every cent. 3 days to sign the withdrawal of any claims, rights, or permissions tied to my property or finances. Caleb shifted in his seat. We never. You did, I said. You know it. I know it. And now my lawyer knows it. John's mask slipped for a second. Just a flicker. Something sour curling at the edge of his mouth. This isn't necessary, he said quietly. We're family. Exactly. And that's the only reason I haven't taken this straight to court. Caleb looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I continued, voice steady. I have 3 signed affidavits. One from my attorney, one from a bank officer, one from a neighbor who saw the nurse enter and leave. I've documented everything. The next step is entirely up to you. John sat back. staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, "but this is ugly." "No," I said. "This is honest. You just don't like how it looks in daylight." They left 10 minutes later. No yelling, no tears, no apologies, just silence and a closing door. As I stood in the hallway after they'd gone, I felt no triumph, only quiet. I hadn't won anything yet, but I'd made my line clear, and for the first time, I saw fear in their retreat. Not fear of punishment, fear of exposure, and that, I knew, was only just beginning. They came back the next night, this time without coffee, without masks. No pretense. It was 8:17 when the knock came. Firm, not frantic. I was already dressed. Slacks, cardigan, slippers. Nothing dramatic. I didn't need drama. I needed truth. I opened the door and let them in. John didn't bother with small talk. "We need to discuss what you're doing." "What I'm doing," I repeated, closing the door behind them. "Yes, you're threatening your own family. Over misunderstandings. Over paperwork. And you've got Lily involved now, which, frankly, is out of line." I walked past him, into the living room, and sat. They followed. Caleb stayed near the doorway, arms crossed, chewing at his thumbnail. "You have until Friday," I said, "to comply." John's voice dropped into that low, measured tone he used when cornered. "You're not thinking clearly. You've let lawyers and paranoia poison everything. But if you keep pushing this, it will get ugly." "There it is," I said. "The first threat." "It's not a threat, Mom. It's reality. You want to drag your family through court? Let reporters dig through every file? Let the church know you're suing your own son? Do you really think I care what the church thinks?" He flinched. I let the silence linger. "You stole from me," I said flatly. "You forged my signature. You hired a nurse to sedate me in the middle of the night. And now you want me to pretend it never happened." John's voice cracked. "We were trying to help you. You were vulnerable. You weren't thinking clearly." "I was thinking clearly enough to install cameras," I said. He stared at me, jaw clenched. "I've reviewed every minute of that footage," I continued. "Every whispered word, every lie. The law doesn't care how gently you steal. It's still theft." Caleb finally spoke. "I didn't know she was going to use a needle. I thought it was just like melatonin or something." "You thought," I said, turning toward him, "that I wouldn't wake up, that I'd sign whatever you put in front of me, that I was too old to matter." He didn't answer. John exhaled hard and leaned forward. "If you take this to court, you lose us. You lose everything." I smiled. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. "I already lost you. The minute you saw my life as a ledger," he stood. "I'll fight this." "You already did," I said. "And you lost. You just don't know it yet." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "You raised me to be strong." "No," I said quietly. "I raised you to be decent. You chose the rest." The door closed behind them harder than it needed to. I didn't get up right away. I let the silence settle over the room, like dust on old books. Then I walked to the filing cabinet, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the envelope I'd kept untouched until now. The one labeled, "Public Copy." Inside, a flash drive. A signed letter from Wesley confirming the validity of the footage. A printed timeline of transactions and forged documents. A letter addressed, "To be released in the event of harm or incapacitation." I placed it by the front door. I wasn't just preparing anymore. I was declaring. The envelope came on Thursday morning. No return address, No stamp. Just slid under my door like a note in a high school locker. Pale cream paper, folded neatly. The handwriting too careful to be casual. I opened it with the letter opener George gave me on our 5th anniversary. The blade was still sharp. Inside were 2 short lines. Be careful who you trust. Accidents happen. I read it once, then again. Then I put it in a plastic sleeve, marked the date and time, and placed it into the evidence binder. Now half full and growing heavier each week. I didn't feel afraid. I felt insulted. They were running out of moves, and sloppy fear always comes before real mistakes. At 10:12 a.m., Wesley called. I received 2 calls this morning, one from a journalist with the county paper asking if I represent you, and one from an insurance investigator requesting a copy of your durable medical directive. My what? Exactly, he said. They're casting lines, seeing if you've been declared incompetent, if they can spin this another way. Let them try. They will, he said, but they won't get far. I've preemptively filed a protective statement with the court, reaffirming your capacity. You've passed every cognitive exam. You're sharp enough to put most people to shame. I smiled into the phone. Keep that on file. I already did. And Louise, there's something else. They'll start trying to turn this around in public. Whisper campaigns. Poor old woman, confused by greedy lawyers. They want to make it muddy. I know. I just want to be sure you're ready. I'm beyond ready, I said. I'm bored. He laughed. I'll draft the official complaint by Monday if they don't comply. They won't, I said, not without pressure. That afternoon, I called Margaret Lacey. Margaret was a retired reporter who now ran a small newsletter for the Historical Society. A smart woman with a nose for rot and no patience for polite silence. She once published a 3-part series on the mayor's cousin's embezzlement from the Veterans Fund. She never lost a lawsuit. Louise, she said when she picked up, I haven't heard that voice in years. I've got a story for you, I said, and receipts. Tell me everything. We met at her house an hour later. I brought a copy of the footage and a carefully marked file. She listened without interrupting, then looked me in the eye. Do you want this public? I want the truth in the open. Quiet justice doesn't work with men like John. She nodded. Then I'll run it in the Sunday edition. Full piece. No soft corners. She picked up her recorder. You ready to go on the record? I sat straighter in the chair. I was drugged at 2 a.m. in my own home by my grandson and a hired nurse so that I'd sign away everything I built. But I didn't. I was awake. I was recording. And now, I'm speaking. Margaret hit record. And I began. The article came out Sunday morning. Front page of the Society Bulletin. Then syndicated by a larger blog Margaret freelanced for. She sent me the draft the night before. I didn't change a word. The headline read, Elder Fraud, Family Lies. A Grandmother Fights Back. There was no photo of me, just my words, my voice, my truth. By noon, my landline rang 5 times. 3 were neighbors, polite, confused, wanting to check in. 1 was from the church. The voice was tight, polite. We're praying for you, Louise. And the 5th call was John. I didn't answer. At 1:34 p.m., I received a text from an unknown number. Why would you do this to us? I deleted it. They thought shame was still a weapon, that I'd feel embarrassed, exposed. But I wasn't the one hiding behind fake names and stolen dollars. By evening, Lily came by with a grocery bag and a tight smile. They're scrambling, she said, setting down a box of tea and a pack of shortbread cookies. Caleb deleted his social media. Dad tried to call me twice, then emailed some legal nonsense. Let him, I said. It's all noise. She pulled out her laptop. Margaret's piece is trending on the regional forum. A few lawyers are commenting, talking about power of attorney loopholes. Some survivors are sharing stories. One woman said her nephew forged her checks for 2 years before anyone believed her. I sat with that for a moment. Then, good. Let them speak. The next morning, Wesley called with a voice that held both amusement and steel. They called my office, he said. Tried to threaten me with a defamation suit. What did you say? I said, my client has documentation, timestamps, surveillance, and a sworn affidavit from a nurse who's willing to testify if subpoenaed. I sat straighter. The nurse? She was fired. Caleb didn't pay her what he promised. She's flipping. Does she admit to the injection? She admits to being asked. Claims she swapped the sedative for saline because she felt uncomfortable. I believed her. Not because she was noble, but because greed makes people sloppy. And someone like Caleb wouldn't have paid well or on time. Wesley continued, I suggest we file formal charges this week. Fraud, coercion, unlawful impersonation, abuse of legal authority. And we will. That night, I sat in my garden for the first time in weeks. The roses had gone dry at the tips, but the roots were fine. A little pruning, a little water, they'd come back, like me. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, grounded, like I'd finally stopped bleeding from invisible wounds. This wasn't justice yet, but it was the beginning of it. And for the first time in months, I slept without checking the locks twice. The summons was served on a Thursday. John received his at 9:47 a.m., hand-delivered at his office. Caleb got his later that evening, at the apartment he shared with a girl who hadn't yet learned who he really was. They both signed. No protest. No calls. They knew. The charges were clear: fraud, forgery, attempted financial coercion, medical endangerment. Wesley had included everything, every form, every timestamp, every recorded word from that night. It was all there now, not just evidence. Truth in ink. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the documents spread before me like a map. It wasn't just about what they'd done. It was how long I'd let them. I stared at the folder labeled 2018-2024 and felt a strange kind of grief. Not for the money, not even for the betrayal, but for the years I'd let go by believing silence was safer than confrontation. It never was. I thought about how many times I'd downplayed the small things, missing mail, vague answers, that feeling in my gut when John deflected questions with too much warmth. How many women my age are told to let it go, to not make a fuss. How many of us vanish quietly in our own homes. That night, I opened a fresh notebook. Soft cover, thick paper, no lines, and I began writing not what they did, but what I remembered before all this. Before George died, before the hospital, before the mail started disappearing. I wrote about my classroom, the smell of chalk, the sound of 30 bodies settling into quiet at the start of an exam. I wrote about George's laugh when he burned toast, the way he always carried the groceries in one trip, no matter how heavy. I wrote about Lily, age 5, holding a robin's egg she'd found in the grass, whispering, "I won't break it." These things, they were mine. No one had tried to take those. The next morning, Margaret called again. Her voice was sharp and electric. "We've had 20 emails," she said. "Women your age, older, some younger. Same story, different names. They're asking if you'll speak again, not about the crime, about the survival." I didn't answer right away. "Louise?" she asked. "Would you?" "I'm not a speaker." You're already speaking. I looked at the notebook in my lap. The page was half full, the writing slanted. My hand wasn't as steady as it used to be, but the words came clean. I'll write something, I said. Good. Send it to me when you're ready. Later that afternoon, I walked to the mailbox, something I hadn't done in weeks without hesitation. The air smelled like dry leaves and cut grass. The breeze wasn't kind or cruel, just present. Inside the box, a grocery flyer, a coupon for roofing, and a single white envelope with no return address. I opened it. Inside was a check. From John. The amount, the exact sum that had been taken. No note, just a payment. A weak apology in the shape of numbers. I held it in my hand, then brought it inside and set it on the table without looking at it again. I didn't need their money. I needed them to know they didn't own me anymore. And now, they did. It had been 19 days since I filed the complaint. The silence from John and Caleb was loud, but not surprising. Their lawyer had responded through formal channels, short, defensive, packed with legal hedging. Wesley called it the noise before surrender. I just called it familiar. I'd stopped waiting for apologies. They weren't coming, and I no longer needed them. That Tuesday, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I took the bus. Route 6, the long loop through town. I used to ride it every week, back when George was still alive. He loved to read the paper on the way, nodding to strangers like they were old friends. The driver was different now, younger, polite. He didn't ask where I was headed. I got off at the last stop before the high school. The building hadn't changed. Same low windows, same flagpole that leaned just slightly. I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street, looking at the place I'd given 34 years to. I could almost hear the bell ringing. It wasn't nostalgia I felt. It was recognition that I had existed long before John or Caleb ever needed me for anything. That I had been someone, with authority, with rhythm, with purpose. And I still was. Afterward, I walked 2 blocks to a small coffee shop I used to visit. It had new owners, new wallpaper, but the scones were the same. I ordered one, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. There was no anger in the pages now, no strategy, just pieces of me returned. I wrote, "There is a loneliness that comes not from being forgotten, but from being misunderstood by people who once loved you. It is a colder kind of silence, but it is also survivable." I closed the book and watched the street. Young mothers pushing strollers, teenagers kicking pebbles, a man in a suit on his phone. I wasn't part of their world anymore, not the way I used to be. But I didn't feel invisible. I felt untethered and oddly free. When I got home, I found a letter in the mailbox. This one had a return address from the district attorney's office. It confirmed what Wesley had already hinted. A formal investigation into financial abuse of vulnerable adults had been opened, with my case cited as the catalyst, not just for prosecution, for reform, policy reviews, banking oversight. My name wouldn't be in the headlines, but it would be in the records. I placed the letter in my keep drawer, right beside the deed to my house, the real one, the one I'd kept in a different place, far from their hands. At dusk, Lily came by. No questions. She just sat with me on the porch, legs tucked under her, sipping iced tea. "I read your piece in Margaret's follow-up," she said after a while. "It made me cry. But not for the reason you think." "Why then?" "Because I realized I've been afraid of becoming invisible too. And now I know what to do if someone tries." I reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. The sun dipped low, turning the trees to gold. And for the first time in years, I didn't brace myself for what would come next. Because whatever it was, I'd meet it as myself. Whole, seen, and free. I didn't go to court. Not because I changed my mind, but because they did. On the 19th day, Wesley called. "They've signed," he said. "Full restitution. Formal surrender of financial control. A statement of wrongdoing, sealed but admissible. You'll never hear from them again unless you want to." I sat at the table with a piece of toast in my hand, uneaten. The radio played something soft and instrumental behind me. "What happens now?" I asked. He paused. "Now you live." And so I did. It didn't happen all at once. Healing rarely does. The mail still made me pause some days. A knock at the door still made my breath hitch. But the fear wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, fading. I took walks again. I called old friends. I answered the phone without scanning the number first. One evening, I opened the letter John had sent with the restitution check. I hadn't read it before. Just 3 lines. "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for what I became. I don't expect you to forgive me." I folded it neatly and placed it with the others. Not out of sentiment, but as a record. The truth deserves a spine. Caleb never wrote. That didn't surprise me. His silence was the truest thing he ever gave me. Lily came often. We didn't talk about the case much anymore. It had become background. Instead, we talked about her work, her writing, her future. Sometimes she asked about mine. "You ever think about leaving the house?" she asked one afternoon. "Traveling?" I looked out the window. "Not yet. This house still has my breath in the walls." She understood. One night, I sat down at my desk with the notebook I'd filled across those long weeks, the one that held pieces of me. I didn't write anything new, I just read. And when I closed it, I didn't feel small. I felt returned. I felt mine. Not anyone's mother. Not anyone's property. Not anyone's burden to manage or steal from, or quiet. Just Louise. That Sunday, Margaret published one last piece, a short one, titled "The Ones Who Fought Back." It wasn't just about me. She'd spoken with others, women, mostly. All with stories. All with names that had been whispered too quietly for too long. I read it once, then again. And then I went outside and cut the last of the hydrangeas, the ones George planted in '89. The ones I almost let die. They bloomed that year brighter than I remembered, like they were waiting, like I had been. And if you've read this far, if you've ever felt erased, ignored, or made small by people who claim to love you, then let this be your reminder. You are not weak. You are not alone. And it is never too late to take yourself back. Share this. Save this. Let someone else remember who they are.